Hi everyone and welcome to Pro Tools Answers, where three Pro Tools experts discuss, demonstrate and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put to the community in Avid's official Facebook support forum. And as Andy and myself, Dave, take you deep into the workings of Pro Tools technique and ethos to help the user community understand and get the best out of their investment. And we hope our tutorials and discussions are helping you do just that. In this episode, we're going to be myth-busting the popular opinion that the Pro Tools master faders are not to be touched. Unlike Anders, who insists on it. Don't worry, I can cut that out.
No. You keep that in.
Yeah, but I won't. The master faders.
You want to start it again?
No. Master faders can be quite confusing to some newer users, and especially those coming from the likes of Ableton and Logic, where the master and output faders are automatically a part of a new session, whereas in Pro Tools we typically have to create them manually. They work fundamentally differently to the other audio-based tracks in Pro Tools, in that we don't so much route audio to them. The master fader's output assignment monitors and controls a specific assigned bus, and the inserts, which can cause headaches if you don't know, are post-fader, whereas opposed to the aux instruments and audio tracks, they are all before the fader in the signal flow. And this makes them tricky with what we traditionally think of using a master fader for as the last track in the signal chain before the signal hits tape. In reality, they're quite different, but incredibly useful, and this is why they should be used, as Andy will likely passionately explain now. So hold on to something.
So a little bit of backstory. So I did this a seminar over at Tokyo School of Music in town, and after the thing, I'm packing up my stuff, and a student comes up and he points to the screen where my session was. He goes, "Excuse me, I noticed that your master fader was down a little bit," and I said, "Yep." He goes, "Why?" And I said, "Well, it was too loud." Trying not to sound flippant. I was like, yeah, it was a little too loud, so I brought it down. And he looked at me like with this expression that said, "Oh, you poor man, you poor uninformed man. Don't you know, haven't you heard the news that you never touched the master fader?" That's what his eyes said. He never said it out loud. But Alex and I, Alex, my colleague who was doing the translation, we had dinner afterwards, and I was just saying, it's amazing how many people are firmly convinced that you don't touch the master fader. We talked a little bit about why that might be. And Alex pointed me to a video that an Avid sponsored artist put out on master faders. And he talks about how you could have multiple master faders. He talks about how the master faders have the post fader inserts. He talks about how to use it. I'm like, he's going through it bit by bit. I'm like, you're nailing it. And he goes right up to he says it. He said at the intro, he goes, "And by the way, never touch the master fader." And I'm just waiting for the end where he describes or makes his case for why you never touch the master fader. And he goes through all the things with the master fader and goes, "And remember, never touch the master fader. Like and subscribe." And the video is done. And I'm like, oh, that was such a letdown, because I was really waiting to hear the case. And I'll be honest, I started to doubt myself. I'm like, do I know what I think I know? Because even though Dave very kindly says 3 Pro Tools experts, we're only certified experts. And I would never call myself an expert. I try not to do that. So if there's a chance that I'm wrong, I'm going to go in there and test myself. And so I did. And I can share my results if you want to say.
Sure. I'm excited about this. But Andy, just to let you know, this is a regular thing coming back to me when I run courses, like the 101, 110 course, and even in the higher courses. There's always someone saying, no, you should never ever touch the master fader. We all know that. It's like it's a very popular myth. Yeah.
So before I show you my experiments, my results, why do you think that is so predominant? Why? I have a theory, but I'm curious about yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are touching on the same subject here. I mean, that's when you were working on an analog console, like in the good old days, as we usually say, you would have the master fader and you would play stuff into that. And the minute you bring down that fader, you're not working at the optimal level of the mixing desk, which would degrade the sound in some way. Is that what you're thinking of? It's like a
Well, I mean,
reminder of the good days or the old days.
Bad old days, the good old days that everybody wants to go back to, except for the people who were actually there. It's like, no, I don't want to work with tape. No, you can't pay me. But remember that an analog console, the expensive analog consoles, each fader was its own amplifier, and any time you with an amplifier, anytime that you change the amplifier from its default setting, which would on a fader be unity, especially when you boost it, it's going to create what's called nonlinearities. And those nonlinearities colloquially we call that distortion. Distortion can either be harmonic distortion on guitar amps, which we love, or non-harmonic distortion, which is what happens on these faders, which nobody likes, right? But it is an unavoidable part of amplifiers. You try to minimize it, but you can never avoid it. And on each one of those faders, you've got a little amplifier. On the master fader, that is an amplifier of the other amplifiers. So if you move the faders on each individual track, you're adding a little bit of distortion. But if you move that master fader, you're adding distortion to the whole thing, and that nonlinearity can, as you say, degrade the mix by adding distortion. That's a best case scenario, by the way, because on cheaper consoles, they aren't amplifiers. They're actually rheostats. They're like the dimmer on your light switch.
Yeah.
And that adds all kinds of noise and once you start to play around with those. So in a best case scenario, you wind up with distortion when you move. And in fact, not to digress, but it used to be back in the old days that there were a lot of engineers that their goal was to record their audio at the level that they thought it was going to be in the mix, so that their perfect mix, the entire console, was at unity. And when you get that, it's like you get the trifecta. It's a perfect mix, and you're not getting any of the distortion from the board. Congratulations, you've achieved this Homeristic kind of thing. And I think that is where this idea comes from, which is correctly applied to analog mixing, but is not correctly applied to digital mixing, at least in Pro Tools. And Dave, you and I were talking about this, and you think that maybe in other DAWs, master faders are not.
I don't think they work this. I don't think they work the same way as they do in Pro Tools. I think they are. Okay. They're probably a little bit more of a traditional. It's just the last point in the signal chain, and it controls the level going out to hard disk, to tape, to speakers, etc.
Right. Well, which is what a master fader does in Pro Tools, right? I mean, it changes. It allows you to adjust the level. Yeah, one of the uses of it. It adjusts the level of an output, right? So the output of a bus or output of an interface, whatever. But my point is this: is that in Pro Tools and in most professional DAWs, we're not amplifying anything. We're changing the gain, but we're not doing amplification, because we're not doing amplification in a DAW world. Nonlinearity distortion is not something that comes from bringing something up or down. That is my theory as to why this myth is so prevalent.
Yeah, just to like summarize. The way that you said it is like everything in any DAW is just simple math, or simple I say, but it's math. Stuff gets stacked on top of each other, and after a while you might even go over the level that your DAW sits at from the start, which can get you distortion. And what you do is then it's like you can, with the master fader, you can lower that window of making it go up so that you can monitor that better or get the. Damn it! You have to cut this out, Dave. I'm just blabbering about. Sorry.
No, we all love we all love your blabbering, and that's one of the reasons that I kind of advocate recording at the lower levels. When we were doing that really, really early show, we were talking about gain staging. I still like to reference that minus 18 dB full scale input level. Andy was talking about the minus 10 because of just the sheer amount of headroom that we have in the system. Yeah. But I think if you're recording at a lower level, that it's less likely that you're going to have an overload at the output stage. automatically. And obviously, we're going to use the master fader to control that. But it's less likely to happen naturally.
And I think, by the way, that what you're saying is your minus 18, which is completely fine, by the way, because if you look at 24-bit audio, you've got 144 dB of dynamic range. You're recording at minus 18. Great. We've got still 126 dB of dynamic range, which is 6 dB more than you can tolerate as a human being. So that's completely fine. And that I think is an aesthetic choice, which is completely cool. But my point is this, is that if your tracks are too loud, what do you touch? And like I said, I wasn't convinced that I was right. And I think it's just been so prevalent, and there's been such an inertia around this idea of don't touch the master faders. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to test it. I'm going to do this and make sure that I know what I think I know.
Yep.
So let me show you what I did.
I'm excited.
Can I ask a question while Andy's setting this up? But just a quick clarification. Andy was just mentioned about controlling gain inside the system using the master fader. I tend to think of once the signal is inside the system, I'm referring to it as level. Are we referring to it as gain, which I tend to think of as the amount of signal that's coming in from the outside world into the DAW, and then once it's in there, it's controlling amplitude, level, etc. Am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong, but we do use the term gain at multiple points. You know, input gain, yes, but we even have a plugin called gain.
Gain reduction, maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Well, but I mean, you can go on to any kind of insert here. If you go to other, let's see, is it multi-mono? Yeah, it's multi-mono.
Use the typepad search.
I know. There you go. Yeah, so you've got EQs.
Yeah, okay.
Is it called gain? It's called gain, isn't it?
Do we have
it's
that?
Called trim?
Trim. It's called.
It's called trim. So let me see if what they call it here. Yeah, so that we use the term gain here. But you know, I mean, you can levels, gain, amplitude. You know, have at it, right? Just amplification is something that's not happening in here. In the same sense that an amplifier with circuitry is doing it, right? Pro Tools is not emulating an analog board, specifically because of all the noise that can happen. So here's a session that I've got, and I'll go and show you what I have here. What I did was I've got a big band chart that I brought everything up as loud as it could be, so it's going to sound like garbage because it's not balanced anymore. I brought everything in my stems up as loud as they could be. I committed my my delays and my reverbs because I didn't want those plugins, if they had any kind of random behavior because of their emulation, I didn't want that to be a factor. Because what we're doing is we're testing the master fader, not testing the timing of the plugins. However, I did leave heat on because I know that heat doesn't randomly apply what it does. It's very consistent. So here we've got a session, and this is a big band chart, and I just took all my tracks and made them as loud as I could, just to create problems. And I also brought the level of all these faders up. So that you can see that we're going to clip on the master. You don't want to hear this. I'm not going to put this through the speakers. But as soon as I start playing, you'll see that I immediately start clipping. And that's at the beginning when it's quiet. If I go over here where there's a lot more stuff happening, you can see we're just slamming that, right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, here's the thing, is there's a lot of folks that will tell you, don't touch the master fader, bring down the rest of the things. And by the way, you know darn well that, you know, people are going to do these meticulous down to the minus 1 dB, 0.1 dB mixes, right? And they're going to find out it's too loud, and they're going to bring it down a little bit. So all the tweaking goes out the window once you have to move 100 faders down.
But there's a fundamental problem with that solution, is that the moment you program in automation, you can't move the fader.
Yeah, you're going to have to go in. You're going to have to
group
use the trim
them and use a VCA or something, or your trim plugin on every track. Or
You've got to do other stuff to be able to get.
Yeah, no matter what, it's going to be a headache.
Yep.
Right. But you have to do it because you can't touch the master fader, right? So this is the problem situation, right? This is the issue that we're here to solve. Now, I created a session with the faders down, right? Same thing, same exact session.
And what you did here was just bring the faders down to the same equal amount to minus 8.
Right, because I want to do a null test in just a second, right?
Yeah.
So I brought those down to minus 8 dB, and what that gives me is a minus 1.2 dB bit of headroom, right? So it's as low as I could get without clipping at some point. Everything's fine, right? And when you listen to it, you can hear that the distortion completely goes away, which, by the way, is a clear indication that the master fader is not adding distortion, right? So it's doing its thing. If I go here to 125, you can see all my stuff is going on, and I'm not clipping, right? So that clearly is a solution, but as you guys pointed out, it's not a solution that's that easy to get to, right? So here's another solution, potentially, right? If it's okay to move a master fader, then here's another possible solution. So here's with the master fader down, that gets to the same end result. It's minus 20 dB down, which gets people really uncomfortable, right? But you can see here that my levels are still the same. If I go to bar 125, they're the same levels. And I don't really care about where this fader is. I care about where my levels are, right?
Yep.
Because I know that, or I think that this is not an amplifier. If it was an amplifier, then we're clearly having a gain staging or an amplification nonlinearity problem, if that's the case, right? So both are valid ways to get to a non-clipping situation, right? To bring down the master fader or to bring down all the other tracks and leave the master fader alone. The question is, are they the same? Will they give you the same results, or is there a valid argument to not using the master fader?
So I take it you just did bounce these two versions, right?
I did. So I bounced all three versions. So,
you know him
you'll
so
see
well,
here.
Anders.
So you'll see here that I've got a bounce of all three of these. And there will be people who won't believe me because it's so ingrained. You're lying to me. I promise you I'm not. There's no reason for me to do this.
But
so
this is
here's
an experiment that you can recreate at home as well, of course.
You could absolutely. So you can see here. Here's my. Here's the one with it clipping. Obviously, that clip is a loss of information, right? It's also going to sound like garbage, but all the information that would go over minus 0 dB full scale is completely lost, right? And that's the distortion that you get from clipping, right? You can see down here in these two waveforms down here. This is the one. The top one here is the one with the master fader down. This is the top one is the one with the faders down. The bottom one is the one with the master fader down. And you can see they look similar in terms of amplification, but how identical are they really? Right? That's my question.
Pretty identical.
They look pretty identical, but it could be, can you seeing distortion is something maybe we can't do. Now, on one clip, on this top one, it doesn't matter which one I do it, I used clip effects for whatever it's worth, and I just flipped the phase. And you can see up here in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little phi, which is your phase inversion. So one of them is flipped from the other. So let's go here, and we'll do... we'll solo the mix that's clipping, and we'll see the master fader here, giving us a sense of levels, and we're clipping, and we're seeing just about what we saw before, right? Now, I'm going to mute this. I'm going to mute one of these, and I'm going to play my mix, and I'll go ahead and clear my clips, and everything's fine, right? The weather's completely good, right? So with one of these, we're completely fine. But how identical is it? I'm going to unmute this, and they phase complete.
The master is nulling out.
Yes, there is no sound because there's no difference between bringing down all the other faders or bringing down the master fader. With one kind of caveat is, with certain combinations of tracks, it might be impossible to get them exactly at the same level to do a true null test, although here it worked out just fine. But there's clearly no distortion being brought in because the master fader was down 20 dB, which you should, if you don't touch the master fader at all, that must have been like a flayable sin, right? But here we're seeing there's certainly no distortion being introduced, right?
or any
So-
changes being introduced.
Yeah, there's no changes at all really being introduced, and I can just keep on going. You're not going to see this thing tick up at all, and so that's the result of my test. Yeah.
Yeah, so being like a skeptic and stuff like that, can you play the face inverted once more, like solo it, muting the other one, or just to make sure that you're actually playing this for real? I can't believe that you actually are right on this. Of course, I'm kidding. I know
Thank you,
are.
Anders. It's awesome.
No, just
so what
just
do you,
for the
what do you want me to
skeptics
do?
out there.
Skeptic?
Yeah, just play the face inverted one. Or
Okay.
flip off the face inversion while playing both of them. That's even better.
Okay, that's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, it
so-
will of course double the
Okay, so that's going to be
Yep.
doubles the amplitude, so that we're
Yep.
clearly hearing something, and there we go. We're clipping. Why? Because we've got too much stuff going on.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go. You know what? I'll even phase invert the other one.
Yeah,
Right? Not that it would make any difference,
it
And-
works.
and it's gone. Anders.
I know that, Andy. I was just asking for all of the skeptics out there. I'm talking to
No,
you.
and this is the thing, is that when we acquire knowledge, this isn't a Pro Tools thing, it's just a human being thing. When we acquire knowledge, we tend to value the first knowledge that we get, which is the source of what's called confirmation bias. And the thing is that this is what my theory is that analog engineers who really knew their stuff knew one thing for sure, is that you don't touch the master fader. And they told their proteges, and their proteges told their proteges, and their proteges had a YouTube channel. And the word gets out because it's a very easy thing to learn. It seems very cut and dried. You don't touch the master fader. That's easy. It's only 4 words. Don't touch the 5 words. Master fader, right? 5 words. I can remember that. No problem.
If you say it really
I'll
quick, it's
own
one
that
word.
knowledge, right? And unringing that bell is hard, even when it's clearly true. And that's part of the reason why I'm not here to scold anybody. Nobody. I like I said, I started to doubt myself. I'm like, I'm sure I know this, but I'm hearing it from so many sources that I've got to test it. I've just got to make sure. And it did what I knew it was going to do, what I hoped it was going to do. And I wanted to show folks that while you could go through flips and twists to bring down all your faders, you scale down your automation, you're not going to have the time to do all of them to the same degree that you did your initial mix. But if you want to do it, have at it, Hoss. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't miss dinner because you don't believe the master fader is your friend, because your master fader is your best friend, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you need one, at any point in your mix, in a subgroup, at the, of course, obviously at the end of your mix, create master faders at will. Whenever you need them, bring them down, secure in the bosom of the knowledge that you're not adding distortion.
Yeah, indeed. I think you've done a really good job of introducing what the master fader is, and how it's just a tool to change level. It doesn't do anything to the signal. It just adjusts the level. And what could be quite useful is going into some practical applications for it. Maybe we could do that next week.
You sure could.
Yeah. Okay. We'll set that up then. So we'll leave that there. So I hope that was interesting for you guys, especially you guys who are still living in the belief that master faders are a thing not to be touched. And hopefully you might end up putting them in a couple of sessions just see how they work for you. So if you're liking what we're doing at Pro Tools Answers, please hit subscribe on our channel page. Hit the bell icon so you get notified every time we release our new videos. If you head over to protoolsanswers.com, you can subscribe over there as well, and Andy will write to you every week letting you know what we're up to. You can also join our Pro Tools Answers community, our very own inner circle, separate to Avid's inner circle. It's still our inner circle for now. You can join that over there, and you can learn about the benefits of being part of our Pro Tools Answers inner circle. And we will see you in the next episode. All he's been to say is thank you to Andy.
You bet.
And thank you to that beautiful guy down there, Anders.
Thank you, Dave.
My name's Dave. This is Pro Tools Answers. We'll see you next time. And we're out.